Welcome to Kane Insights. I'm Kimberly Kane, coming to you from Titletown Tech in Green Bay. We're talking with Megan Dickman-Renard, CEO of Dickman Media Group and publisher of the Business News, who took a leap from a degree in the classics to build a growing media empire. Megan, thank you so much for being with us on the Kane Insights podcast.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So let's talk about your big insight. What is the insight you want to talk about today?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I've learned throughout my journey is if you don't see it, it's really important to build it. So to not be afraid of building something that you don't see in the market, of taking that risk.
And that's a bold insight. If you don't see it, build it. I want to unpack that throughout the podcast today. But let's talk about the journey that got you to where you are today. As I'll call you a media mogul, right? As the CEO of
I'll take it.
Dickman Media Group and the CEO and publisher of the Business News here in Green Bay. You've built something extraordinary.
Thank you.
Here in this market, because of something you didn't see. So what was your journey to this point?
Yeah, I always say that my route to media was a very non-traditional one. And sometimes when you say that, people have an expectation of how non-traditional that is. And I think I often end up in a even further non-traditional than what people expect. But I originally started in Latin and ancient Greek. So literally doing ancient Greek philosophy, reading mathematical texts, which some people, I think, the idea of doing that makes them want to smash their head against a wall. But I always loved what language could do. Mm-hmm. You know, every language thinks a little differently. Mm-hmm. You think about the building blocks of how you communicate, and you're limited by what you can physically say in your language. So every time you learn a language, it's like unlocking this new way of thinking. And for me, that was absolutely incredible when I stumbled on it, and I loved that.
Did you have an idea of what you wanted to do for a career with that?
I would say I always had hypotheses about what I wanted to do for a career. And what the idea was originally was actually to do art restoration and conservation. So that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to help restore art. And I realized that with classics, the only real career path is then to become a professor. And I thought, is that the future that I want? Mm-hmm. Is that the impact I want, is to build more people who are just going into classics, or do I want something larger for the community? So I ended up choosing to leave school at that point. I didn't know what I was going to do. I had been out in Philadelphia at the time. I moved back to Green Bay, and I looked at what I had in my degree, and I called it scrapping my degree for spare parts.
Okay.
So I pulled out the things that were useful, which was not the Greek. It was, the writing, the research, the really careful attention to language. And what I did is I built my first business, which was called Crystal Clear Resources, and it was a writing, editing, and translation business. So we translated to and from 27 different languages, including translation work for Forbes books. We would help translate their business books into different languages. And we did grants, patents. We helped write fiction and nonfiction books. Basically, if you could write it, we loved it. And there's an interesting thing that happens when you build a business, especially when I was fairly young. And it was my first business. You realize as you get into it, if I had to do this all over again, or if I had the opportunity to do this all over again, I would do this so different. Mm-hmm. 3 years in, I was looking at my business model, and I was like, I would have refined all of these things. And you have a choice. Do you stick and refine something that you've built, or do you say, hey, this was a great first try?
Right.
Let's build something better.
Yeah.
So I chose that second option at the wonderful time of December 2019.
Okay.
Moments
which was before
the whole world stopped.
Right? Yeah.
Yep. So I entered the pandemic with an idea that I loved in industry. I loved communications, but I didn't have a place to put that love. Mm-hmm. And what happened was, as I think so often these moments in our career are, I don't know if the universe just like put something in your path. But I'd had somebody that was in my ecosystem for about 18 years at that point approach me, remembered me from that first business, and said, hey, I'm doing a startup. And what I really need is someone who is adept at communication and who really likes gaming, because this was in the tabletop role-playing industry. So like Dungeons and Dragons, Pathfinder. Yeah. And I said, yes, my best recommendation is myself. Please hire me. Great. I would love a job. That would be wonderful. And they said, okay. We were expecting that we would have funding for somebody fresh out of college. but if you're sure that you want to take that risk, we would love to have you. I'm like, yep, absolutely. So it was such an interesting experience now working in a startup, not being the founder,
Right.
because previously I'd been the founder, and they were about as different as you could get. One is a 38-year-old Star Wars nerd, which I say lovingly, and the other one is the former All-Pro center for the Dallas Cowboys.
Wow.
So they were completely opposite, but they had grown up as friends across the street from one another in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, the birthplace of D&D, which was pretty great. Yep. So it was a great story. And as we continued to grow, this great story kept building on itself. We ended up getting a partnership contract with Marvel Entertainment, which was really cool. I'm a nerd, as you might have noticed from some of our earlier talks, but Captain America, Iron Man, like that was really cool. And there are some moments in your career where you realize like, I'm in a different league than what I thought I would ever be in. And that was one of those moments. And I'm like, wow, I would love to be able to share this.
Yeah.
So you start reaching out to media. You're like, this is a great story. So reach out to media, and it got picked up in the digital edition of Forbes, which was really cool.
Wow.
And then it got picked up in our local paper.
Yeah.
And when it got picked up in our local paper, it was less good, which is not to say like it was well written, and it's by a reporter I respect a lot. But I think you make choices, right? And the choice was to focus on the gaming industry as a whole. And in doing that, instead of highlighting some of the really interesting things about our business, it kind of did this regression to the mean, right? And since there wasn't a whole lot happening with the gaming industry besides physical game stores, it ended up being a lot about physical game stores. So I had a moment of, okay, we can't be the only business that's struggling to get media to understand why we wanted to do this story, why it's important, what value we're seeing, what the vision is for where we're going to go. It felt like there was a disconnect.
And this is the, if you don't see it.
That was
the context in the story that was written in your own backyard.
Yeah. You saw, that's where you start feeling those pain points, right? And when something starts feeling uncomfortable, I think there's a trick to go and investigate why it feels uncomfortable.
Sure.
And for me, there was this, okay, that's not what I was expecting. I input a good story. Like I gave you everything that I felt was right. And then I don't understand what came out of it.
Right.
So now you get to investigate. And for me, it felt like there was a disconnect between the media and business. So then you start investigating like other businesses. Hey, have you been experiencing this? I found out that that's since true. And around the same time as that investigation, the previous owner of the Business News, because the Business News was started in 2003, the previous owner remembered me from my first communication business and said, hey, I'm looking to get out. Would you ever have an interest in buying a newspaper? I said, well, that's an interesting kind of moment to have two things happen at once. And to say, okay, so I have this problem or this piece of uncomfortable like data that I have accumulated. And now I've got a vehicle where I could do something with it. Do I want to jump into an industry that, arguably I did not come up through media.
Right.
I'm a consumer of media, and I think a very thoughtful one, but I hadn't had that background. And so made the decision to say, yes, I want to jump in. I want to help solve this problem. What I'm going to need is to really listen to the market as I start doing that. So then the trick was doing this. I have to find absolutely anyone who will talk to me so that I can learn where their pain points are too.
You said some very interesting things as we've talked about your journey from where you graduated with degrees
classics in archaeology,
through the business story. And one of the common themes that I've heard you say is, there have been stars that have aligned for you with people who remembered you and opened up doors for you or asked questions, but there was also a bit of gumption, a bit of why not? Let's try it. Going forward into exploring what that next step is, going forward and exploring what that opportunity is. How important is that to building something, to being an entrepreneur?
Yeah, I think some of it is, I love that kind of point out about the confluence of opportunities, because I think we're surrounded by opportunities every day and things that come to us. And you think about how many times somebody said, oh, you would be really great at X, Y, or Z, and you might laugh and, oh, I don't, maybe I won't take that seriously. Why not take it seriously? If there's an opportunity where, mine came together, where there's a problem and there's a now a business I could, use to help solve my problem, why not be the person who's building that solution? Nobody else seemed to have kind of poked at the problem. So sometimes it's not because you have the best background or the most significant background, maybe, or you haven't been in it for ages. Sometimes it's just because you can see where the problem is. One of my favorite kind of quotes isn't that, it's not that they can't see the solution, it's that they can't see the problem. And I think as you get really used to, I think with news, you get used to a quality of news that sometimes it gets hard to ask, could there be a better way to do this? Could there be a way where I feel more represented, where I feel more seen, where I feel like I'm being asked questions that get me excited about talking with media, where I really know that I'm safe there and I can share and I can have confidence that when I see the story, it's going to be the story that I was sharing.
Because you didn't have a traditional background
Absolutely
in
not.
news. Did you ever question yourself? Did you ever think, maybe I'm not qualified for this?
I knew I was qualified to run a business. Now, when we talk about the journalism part of it, then for me, what was really important was to find experts that I could surround myself with. So then it was, okay, I better employ journalists who absolutely know what to do in the industry and have demonstrated that they can be really, really capable in the industry. That's one of the ways I got my editor. And I knew I had to employ journalists because I think the danger I could have fallen in is to say, well, I have a non-traditional background. I could employ all of these people who also have non-traditional backgrounds. But if you really want to kind of respect an industry and innovate, you have to respect the traditions of the bones of that industry. The things that make journalism great are true. Now you just also need people who can see a vision of something that doesn't exist already, that they're willing to help build it with you.
Yeah. There's a certain humility in what you're saying. So there's a confidence, right? On one hand, that you don't see it, you investigate it, you decide you want to build it, but there's a humility as well, right? That I'm hearing from you, that if you're going into a new industry where you are an entrepreneur, you are creating that cutting edge, you're asking those questions about, okay, who else do I need around me and on my team in order to make this successful?
Well, and I think too, it's really easy when you see a problem in an industry to lead with criticism. But the industry is there for a reason. So I think if you lead with more of, love and respect for what the industry is trying to do, and then say, okay, I absolutely understand what you're trying to do. Here's the gap I'm seeing. How do we bring those two things together? And instead of being just really critical about everything that's happened, because even, when I bought the paper, it wasn't where I wanted it yet. I could lean on the fact that I was really critical about the paper, but you pick the parts you love. And then you fix the parts you don't.
So there's a positivity that you're taking versus being led by the criticism and the gaps that you see. You're looking at the opportunity and being led by that positivity to make things better. So the business news and then Dickman Media Group, you're still building.
Always.
What are you building?
Yeah. Well, I think the important thing is to always have something that you're working on refining. And I have the business news to a point where I love it. I'm not done even building on the business news. So we have changes there. And I think part of it, and what I love about like for-profit businesses too, because nonprofit kind of does its own thing in a lot of ways, but you have to be hyper responsive to the market. So the business that you built 4 years ago for the market that existed 4 years ago might not be the market that exists now, which means there's this constant calibration and you have to constantly be listening to feedback to the market and see where things are going. So one of the next places for us is in more multimedia aspects, specifically this idea that not everybody consumes information the same way. Sometimes it's time. People just don't have, they have varying degrees of time. Not everyone's going to sit and read a newspaper. How do you mitigate some of the time commitments? Some people aren't readers. That doesn't mean that they don't want the information. How do you create audio or video opportunities so that they can have information? How do you engage with your audience and give them opportunities to learn about you and how they learn best? And then on the Dickman Media Group side, I always have something, but we're also leaning into that multimedia side and storytelling. I think one of the things that we just miss a lot of times, especially in our area, we have a lot of people here who are so humble.
Mm-hmm.
And I even see it when we reach out about stories.
Yeah.
They're like, why would you want to do a story on us? Because you're interesting.
Yeah.
You're absolutely interesting. And we're interested in a lot more than what people think.
Yeah.
But you see people who, they don't want to tell their story, or maybe they don't know how. And if they're not told, we lose some of that knowledge. We lose the why businesses existed in certain ways.
2 more questions. One is greatest lessons learned to this point. You are clearly still at the very beginning, and I can only imagine how much more you will see or not see and build. But what have been the greatest lessons for you to this point?
I think one of the ones that'll be evident in my team is you find people who are better than you and you let them run. You let them do the things that they're best at. And it's really hard to micromanage somebody when you want somebody who's better than you, because then you're the limitations on them. So
you go out of it and bring those people on board.
Yeah. I love being the convener of all of those people and having a really good rapport where we can have conversations, but I want them to be better than me. And then, the other thing is when you're thinking about like building something for a market, don't forget the market. Because I think a lot of times if you see a problem and you start building something without considering the market and who's in it and asking them what they want, you build something that doesn't fit. So there's this idea of, don't do something for us without us. So don't build a solution for a market without considering the market.
Right. Yeah. No, that's a great insight. Okay, I'm going to put you on the spot with the last question.
Yeah.
That is the Megan Dickman-Renard checklist for if you don't see it, build it. What would be your checklist of recommendations for people who may be in a similar situation where they know there's an opportunity and they'd like to build it? How do they get started?
Yeah, I think first is, okay, so if you sense that there's an opportunity there, start investigating. And really approach it through that research lens. Like, why do I feel this way about this market? Is this a problem that exists? Have I identified the real root of the problem, or just kind of an outgrowth of a larger problem? And then, start thinking, okay, so am I positioned well to solve this? Is this something I solve on my own? Is this something I have to find collaborators to help create a solution? And then recognizing you don't have to build everything at once. You can start incrementally. You can start with something smaller and grow into a full-fledged solution. But I think people get hung up on, okay, the problem feels so big. Big problems are worth it. But if you start big, if you eat the whole elephant at once, that becomes really, really difficult. There's not a lot of people I know who can stomach that.
And it might deprive you of learning opportunities, right?
Yeah. Well, if you start small, you also can calibrate as you go.
Yeah.
It allows you to be a lot more agile. So start small, but start.
All right. We're going to put that checklist together and make sure people have access to it. Megan, this has been such a pleasure. I've learned so much from you through this conversation. Congratulations on all that you're building. And one request, I would love to have you come back and unpack one of the insights you were talking about. And that is the conversation we had just briefly about local news. I'd love to have you come back for another podcast and talk about local news.
Oh, thank you. I would really appreciate that. And thank you for talking today. I had a wonderful time.
Great. Thanks, Megan.
Thank you.